Okay, guys, thanks again for joining me today. It's always an honor to have you take time out of your day and tune into what we have to say and engage in this knowledge transfer process, which tends to go both ways a lot of times in these discussions. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone about 20649 and what it will mean for firms in the days and weeks and months to come. Of course, for those that know me, I'm not an attorney, and I know there's a lot more rules and regulations that were mentioned on February 9th, but in my non-lawyer mind, everything is just called 20649, and that's what you're going to hear me call it today. So please forgive me if I get the actual regulation codes wrong in our talk today. So I want to focus on some of the operations and technology that I use to help accomplish the cybersecurity mission for our clients. In the future, I want to put together a town hall style meeting where we can bring together some CCOs in an open Zoom discussion to share ideas about how to best tackle these regulations. Like I said, a lot of times we learn just as much from you as hopefully you do from us. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to attack the poll attached to this webinar, and I'll reach out to you afterwards, or cell phone or email for those that know me can also get you involved in that. But just want to have an open Zoom discussion so we can kind of discuss what everyone's doing out there. The larger idea for today is that for the CCOs that are also the IT managers in your firm, I hope this webinar will give you some insight into what programs you need to be thinking about implementing and what cybersecurity data you need to be collecting. And for my non-IT compliance folks, I hope this webinar will give you an understanding of the information that you need to be requesting from your IT department, and that this would be an organized fashion to do that the way I'm going to show you today. So I see some familiar faces. There's a lot of new faces as well. So welcome everyone. My name is Brian Hahn. I'm the founder here at M-Tradecraft. I've been working in this capacity for the past 12 years, and in the decade before that, I held several CCO and COO positions with SEC registered firms, and also did some private intelligence contracting in Costa Rica. Right now, when I work with my SEC clients, my job is really to get them in a position so that they're prepared to defend against cyber attacks, but also to respond to regulatory audits. So really a double-sided mission there. And today I want to show you some of the tools that I use to accomplish that mission for my clients. I'm going to start with a brief regulatory overview of the SEC and cybersecurity, and then discuss what will be required of CCOs. And then I'm going to demonstrate some software that I think should be the foundation of every firm that is planning to tackle this cybersecurity workload in-house. I've used this process with a little over 200 firms, to get control of the cybersecurity situation, and to maintain a defensive security posture for the firm. And then, I think at the end we'll end with a little Q&A session where I'm happy to answer your questions. And of course, we do that in an anonymous fashion. So if you've seen my webinars, you know I'm a true believer in transparency. And so up front, I'm going to show you a couple pieces of software today. M-Tradecraft or myself, we don't have any relationship with this software technology. We pay full retail price to use these products just like you would. So I just want to be transparent about it. The two options I'm going to show you today work very well. They're by no means the only options that work. So definitely look at your solutions. But again, we just want to have a little knowledge transfer process for those that want to tackle this type of stuff in-house so that they'll be able to do that. So again, we're all here for February 9th. We got the combined cybersecurity risk management release from the SEC that I'm collectively calling 20649. There's a great two-pager out there. I'll be sure to include it on the handout after the webinar if you haven't seen it yet, but that walks through some of the things that are going to be coming forward. One of the big parts of the regulation is going to be the cybersecurity risk management rules, where you're not only going to have a solid written policies and procedures manual, but also going through the technicals of that manual. And I'm going to focus on a lot of that today. And we're also going to focus on the record keeping aspect, the 204-2 aspect of it, and the record keeping, and how should we be tracking these cybersecurity issues and data and responding to requests and that sort of thing. So there's a couple issues in this proposal that I want to mention that I think you should be aware of. There's going to be reporting of cybersecurity incident requirements that are going to go to the SEC. That's going to be on Form ADV-C. And there's also going to be requirement for disclosures of cybersecurity risk and incidents to your clients. I can just tell you personally, I'm not the biggest fan of either one of these issues or either one of these ideas. For one, disclosure to the clients is really not helpful for them, other than if you're disclosing that you're actually doing this type of work. So I'm not the biggest fan there. The other one I have a major problem with is the reporting of significant cybersecurity incidents. Unfortunately, we are in a position with the Freedom of Information Act where the SEC already releases a lot of information about you guys. You know, how many clients you have, how many employees you have, how many offices you have. There's a lot of public information out there already about you. And this is only going to add to it. You know, when we do these penetration tests and we do these simulated hacks and our webinars, you'll see one of the first things that we do is collect this open source data about our target, because this is data that we can collect and we don't even have to interact with the victim. You know, it's a fingerprintless crime to get this information, and we need this information to start preparing attack. So kind of a side note to what we're here today, but with those two issues, I'm not the biggest fan of them. I think it's actually going to introduce more cybersecurity risk to the firms, potentially even because these two particular issues don't require the involvement of the FBI. Which if you're not getting the FBI involved from the start, it's really just not a good situation, and it prevents the FBI from doing their work as well. So, you know, a couple issues I have with that. I won't dive into it too more, but today, again, we're going to focus on the risk management rules and the record keeping rules. If you followed our previous work, I'm just kind of a side note here, there really isn't much different here than what we were already seeing in the examination information request list. So I know a few of you have been on our distributions for a little while and have probably received this document. Honestly, it's probably been a year since I've updated it, as we've just been passing around the actual cybersecurity request to our clients. It probably needs some attention, but you know, again, for the people that have been following what we're putting out, and that is, you know, looking at what the SEC was actually looking for in these cybersecurity examinations and then building the documents thereop. There's really not much different in 20649 versus what they were already requesting, you know, when they were coming and requesting documentation. So just kind of a side note of what we're seeing as we read through the 200+ pages of it. So again, I want to start with just kind of an overview of what the cybersecurity world looks like for the CCO, whether you're an IT-minded person or not. If you've seen on our other webinars, we've covered the threats, you know, so we've simulated phishing campaigns and show how we make malicious PDFs. We've shown how we can attack unpatched vulnerabilities left on the outside, and we'll touch on a few more of these later in the webinar. But these are mostly the threats. As you can see, kind of the different threats that were coming into our network. For each attack that we could see documentation out of, they involved some element of these attack vectors. Ultimately, as the CCO or as the firm or the IT, ultimately at the center of what we're protecting is information. And I should really change this graphic to be information and, of course, client assets. You know, we always have our clients think about hacks and the potential risk management issues in two different buckets. One is where data goes missing, and the other is when funds go missing. You know, so that should really be both kind of in the core. You know, of course, for the IT folks, we know we have some confidentiality, integrity, and availability issues around that data, which ultimately allow that data to be used with different pieces of hardware, software, and in different kind of communications. So essentially all that's saying is, you know, we have sensitive data, whether it's at a custodian, whether it's at an internal server, whether it's at a cloud provider, it really doesn't matter. It's still sensitive data. And in some way or fashion, it's, you know, interacting with these different pieces of of software and hardware. The outside of that is physical security. I'm not going to touch on that today, but these are, of course, things like keeping your office secure. For us, it's even keeping Wi-Fi secure, so you don't have someone come into a big office building, sit in the bathroom and launch a Wi-Fi attack on a local network. And then involved around that is personal security. So that's a big one for us. As you can see, phishing is a major attack vector. So we use our Fieldcraft training to work with clients on that and to get their, to not only do threat assessments and figure out where the risk may lie with the potential employees, but also to train them how to interact, with not only firm assets, but also with data, emails, and that sort of thing. And what we're really going to focus on today is organizational security. So again, whether you're the CCO and needing to do this work yourself, or you're getting this from your IT department or your IT provider, you should need to know what you're going to need to provide that organizational security to not only protect your network, but also to be able to respond to a regulatory audit. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. And so, what is organizational security? This is a very simple graphic we use in some of our sales process to demonstrate what a typical network might look like for a firm. And so, this is a very simple setup, obviously, but most firms are going to have a physical office where they will have employees who use workstations that are connected to an internal network. Maybe you have print servers, maybe you have application servers, maybe you don't have any of this and everything is located in the cloud, which employees would access by usually going through a switch or a firewall and a router, coming out to the internet, and then going to, especially now remote offices, we have employees working from home. Perhaps there's DMZ zones like websites, email servers, things like this at cloud providers. So this is a very simple map that we use to, kind of describe what would be going on in the firm. And then we use the flags to describe what the firm is responsible for knowing, inventorying, and making sure they're patched, updated, and not vulnerable. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we actually build this information for our firm and understand the firm at that level? So the two pieces of software I'm going to talk about today that we use, one is Multigo, and Multigo is a piece of intelligence software that we have been using to do this type of work, for SEC firms for a while now. The cost of it is $999 a year. It's essentially like a graphical map brainstorming application, and we use it to organize both the internal and external networks, as well as track employee user access rights, which is going to be a big topic with 20649. We use it to conduct our threat intelligence work, which I'll show you a little bit of that, in determining what breaches may have already happened, what employees may have leaked information. The one thing I really like about Multigo is it's free and it's an open source database, so we can easily pull the data out and use it wherever we need. And it's extremely versatile with some very simple coding, with Python in the background for those that are interested. Very simple Python coding. I really haven't found anything that I can't connect Multigo to do. On the vulnerability scanning side of it, we use Nessus. I think Nessus retails now for about $29.90 a year for a license to go in and scan your network. So we use this to scan external assets, internal assets, cloud networks, pretty much anything we can find connected to a firm. Nessus will do it all for us. There's others out there, competitors to Nessus. I know they probably do just as well. Nessus for us has just been, a great product, and I'll show you a little bit about it here in a second. So this is Multigo, and this graphic you're seeing that looks like a colorblind chart is a real-world graphical map for a small firm. I believe this firm had 3 employees, relatively small one-office location. And this is what the map looks like for here. So what you're seeing in this graphic is if you actually zoomed in on these different dots, you would find different items and different hosts and different pieces of information. So this map represents our network mapping. So we know everything that's on our network when the SEC asks. It's our IT checklist. So we know how many computers we have that are running Windows 10. It's our patch management solution. So if I want to look at John Doe's Windows 10 installation and know that the patches are up to date, I can do that through Multigo. If I have threats or vulnerabilities that need to be managed, Multigo helps me do that and track that and collaborate, whether I'm doing it myself or working with an IT firm. It helps bridge that work. We use it for user access rights, so determining what systems employees have access to and what level of access they have to those systems. Use it for HR admin, reputation management, and social media management, which I'll show you a little bit about here in a minute. So Multigo, again, the idea is that we want to build the battle map of what is in our network, what systems are running on our network, and what may be potentially vulnerable and how we fix it. So I know that's a mouthful, but we'll dive into it here in a little bit. So if you zoomed in on a couple of those dots, this is a section, like a zoomed in section to kind of show you a simple idea of what information is set up like. At the top, you can see we have our company, Vela Ford. Vela Ford owns the domain velaford.com. And then on velaford.com, there is a secure.velaford.com domain, which hosts our most sensitive client data. And Vela Ford employs an employee, John Doe. And when I click on John Doe, it'll give me all the information I need to know about him. And I can customize this in any way, depending on what information you track about your employees. So, you can add attachments, work contracts, whatever you need to manage the HR of this particular employee. And then I can also track things like his email address. So what's his work email address? What's his personal email address? And what's his phone number? And this gives me just kind of quick access and reference to this particular individual and the data associated with them. And it also gives me the groundwork to build a larger chart from, which we'll show. Here is a zoomed in section of that secure.velaford.com. So what you're seeing is we took Nessus and we used Nessus to scan secure.velaford.com. And Nessus goes through and scans this particular host for known vulnerabilities. And then we download that database, import it into Multigo, and this is the type of data we get. So at the top, if I click on secure.velaford.com, it's going to give me a detailed view over here at the right. Essentially, what we're doing with this is cataloging all the different IT systems, services, hosts, ports, everything that is open and associated with this particular domain. So this, for one, gives us a couple key pieces of information that we're going to need to know. For one, when we know that there's a vulnerability that comes out, log4j, for instance, which was the most recent one, this gives us a really quick database to go in and search and understand if we have any systems that could potentially be vulnerable to that particular attack. So it's a great way to go through. If you're not already, you can subscribe to the CISA releases that come out every Tuesday about known vulnerabilities and new vulnerabilities. For us, we pull it up, we read through it, we look for systems that we think could potentially be in our client's infrastructure. We go into Multigo, we type it in, and within 10 seconds, we know every client that may have that potential vulnerability. So, this is a great way to really map everything that's going on and know if you have a potential vulnerability or need to rescan. Of course, Nessus is going to find a lot of those vulnerabilities. And if there were a vulnerability, I should have a screenshot of here, but I don't. But this will actually look like a little red time bomb so that you know what you need to address on that issue. Here's another one, another internal map of Dunder Mifflin. As we can tell, Dunder Mifflin has an office in Scranton. And then we mapped out two different hosts that were on that office. One is a computer that belongs to Pam, and another is a scanner sitting next to Pam. And again, you can kind of see same thing internally that we did externally on the secure.velaford. We're doing internally here within a local office. So actually taking a computer, Looking at what ports and services are open on it. One of the big things I'm looking for is, does a computer have remote desktop connection open? I want to know if my employees have opened remote desktop connection. A lot of times I'll find like the splash top software or software that we didn't authorize them to put on their computer. So this is a great way to kind of synthesize that information and know what you need to go after. Again, here's an example. Actually, you can see the little time bomb. So this is a vulnerability on Pam's computer that we'll need to address. And if I were to click on that time bomb over on the right here, it would give me all the details of that vulnerability, what needs to be done, a written solution, everything I need to know, which is pulled in from that Nessus program. So the great thing, I should have mentioned a little bit earlier about Multigo, the great thing about Multigo is when you do this, it just creates a track record for showing a track record of compliance. You know, we can show that we found a vulnerability and that we put it into the workflows to get it fixed. So it really allows us to show that chain of movement for compliance. Here's another way that we use Multigo for threat management work. So this is zoomed in. If we went back to that HR example where we had johndoe@gmail.com as the personal email, we want to know what breaches have these email addresses been involved in. So personally, we have Multigo. Internally, we have about 8 terabytes of breach data that we've collected that we go through and search for our clients. And then we also have it connected to Have I Been Pwned, which is actually fantastic because it's built into Multigo. You don't even have to do anything to get access to that type of data. But what we want to do is at the top, we take an email address and we run it through our database. And below that, you'll see the names of the different breaches where we found this email address located. And also a little note about the breach and what happened. And then down below that, you'll see the different information that we were able to collect from those breaches. So, of course, there's some very troubling information here. There's IP addresses, there's passwords, there's historical passwords, there's password hints, there's driver's licenses, social security numbers. There's a lot of really sensitive data here. As a firm, we want to be aware of this data because this is going to be the same data that a hacker is mapping when they're coming after your firm. They want to know if when they go to the passwords that have been found for John Doe, if he uses the same password, you know, password 123 over every different connection, you know, or every different breach, there's chances, you know, he's probably not using very good cybersecurity practices. So he might be a good target. And of course, again, you know, rounding that back out to the SEC has already released a bunch of information about you, including, you know, email addresses of some of your most sensitive executives that have access to a ton of data. So I can easily pull those emails, start searching for breaches and find the weakest link that I'm going to go after. So this is the type of threat intelligence work we want to be doing, not only with our internal email addresses. The other thing I'll say that we want to mention on here is we want to look for potential blackmail situations. One of the biggest situations we've dealt with over the past few years have been involved with the Ashley Madison breach, which you may have heard me mention it before, but essentially Ashley Madison was a website that promoted adultery between married couples, and their database was ultimately breached. And the problem became it was very easy to go into that database and look for people who had signed up using work email addresses. So, Chris at abcfinancial.com or John Doe at, fakefinancial.com. And now you have people that potentially, might have access to funds or sensitive client data that you can blackmail. So we always want to be aware of what employees are doing with our work email addresses. What breaches they may have already been involved in, do dark web searches and all that. So Multigo makes that very simple to do and to organize so that we can also show the SEC we're doing our threat management and breach detection work. So I'm going to jump to the Nessus dashboard now. So Multigo ultimately takes a lot of information from Nessus and organizes it into a beautiful chart, and then Nessus goes out and gets that information for us. So when you log into Nessus, this is the dashboard that you are greeted with. Up at the top, you'll see host discovery. So if I'm brand new to a network and I just launched Nessus, I'll start a host discovery just to find what's on the network, who's talking to who, what ports, what hosts are open. I mean, just all the information that I can find about the networks generally where I'll start. And then from there, I can determine what other scans I need to do. One of the things I absolutely love about Nessus is they're always up to date with the latest vulnerabilities. Whenever one comes out, they'll generally have a plugin for it. So you can see here's the log4 shells, which was the log4j vulnerability. So even if you did your Multigo search and you didn't find anything, you could also jump into Nessus and run this particular search on your system to understand if there might be a vulnerability there. So there's a lot of different plugins that we use frequently here. Mobile device scans and mobile device management system scans are very popular to get done to make sure mobile devices are secure. We also are pretty big on the cloud audit scans. So for the Salesforce, the Amazon web servers, the Google Clouds, I know I'm missing some others on there, but for the big cloud environments, actually plugging those in and making sure they're secure. So when you log in for a firm, this is where you set up the different scans that you would need to do depending on what your infrastructure looks like. Another thing I really love about Nessus is when you're launching these scans, it gives you the ability to automate them and send them out in an email. So, if you're CCO and you want to be, put on these emails to see what's going on, you can be alerted to when new hosts connect to the network, when there's new vulnerabilities in the network. It'll automate everything for you in the background. This is an example of what Nessus looks like when we're doing internal vulnerability management. So this was a firm that we scanned. Over on the left, you can see the different host IP address and then the different vulnerabilities that are associated with that particular host. And then some graphical breakdown on the right. So up at the top, if you click on vulnerabilities, it'll actually let you dive into the vulnerabilities. If you click on remediations, it'll take you to the written instructions on how to fix that problem. And then it's also going to list your top threats. So, kind of given what it knows about your network, what does it see as the top threats? So this is what it looks like when you click into, excuse me, I'm not going to show that just yet. This is what a cloud audit looks like, just so you kind of get an understanding of what a particular audit would look like. So this was an audit run on the Amazon AWS setup. And what we do is we take the configuration of that setup and then compare it to a known benchmark. And then it will come back and say, hey, multi-factor authentication is not enabled for all users. And if I click on this, it would actually take me to the list of users that are not using multi-factor authentication so that I can go address that with them. So when you actually click on the vulnerabilities, what happens is you'll be greeted with a screen that looks like this. It will describe the vulnerability and give you a written solution to it. This one is very simple, which most of them are. A lot of them are just going to be upgrades and patches. And then it'll show you a quick screenshot of where it found that particular vulnerability and some outside references if you want to read more about it. So one of the things that we often see is that the SEC references the NIST, and the NIST wants to see different CVSS factors associated with the vulnerabilities when you find them. When you find them, which they used to be kind of a pain, but Nessus actually does that for us right over on the right. And if there is a known vulnerability, a known exploit for this vulnerability, it will host that right over there to the right as well. So a lot of information that comes out of Nessus there. So again, kind of rounding that back out, what we're doing, the kind of the grand scheme of things is that, we take Nessus, we deploy it across the network to get an understanding of what's on that network, what hosts, services, and systems are running, and then we compare that for known vulnerabilities. And then we import that into Multigo so that we have an easy graphical overview of our network and what's on that network. And we also have an easy way to sort and scan through the different information that's on there. So, we use Multigo to organize everything and build this kind of security dashboard that the CCOs and the CISOs can use to communicate and work on the cybersecurity situation. And that's, that's rounding it out. That's the whole goal of it. Again, I think there's other systems that would work just as well. But for us, this is what we use when we're going into a firm and we need to, sometimes we're working with a brand new CCO, or we're working with someone who really doesn't have an understanding of what is on that ecosystem or infrastructure. And these are the two pieces that we start with to really get a grasp of that. Again, so that we can go through and do our vulnerabilities and also be able to respond to a regulatory audit. From this, you'll generally have a good idea of what needs to be done afterwards, right? So we call this our foundation. When we set up Multigo and then we set up Nessus and we start building this dashboard, we start working through our vulnerabilities and documenting that in Multigo to show that we're working through them and rescanning and so on and so forth to show that we're keeping this going. So that's just how we do it. It's worked really well from us. We haven't come to a situation where we haven't been able to use these two key pieces of software. For some of you that are using exotic trading desk software or Bitcoin mining, servers or something exotic of that nature, perhaps it wouldn't fit into, to this type of setup. But for us, this has been the foundation that we found that works really well. And so that's it, guys. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Of course, if you have any questions about your particular firm or what we discussed, feel free to reach out to me, and we can have that discussion. And I'm happy to open it up to a Q&A now. If you guys want to get some questions in there, I'm happy to answer them. And so let me get that up here, and I'll start working through some of those questions here. Okay, the first question I have is how long does it take to set up these two systems? That's going to depend on your IT skill level. Nessus is definitely the easier of the two products to get into play. Multigo does take a little bit more time. I would consider myself an expert level Multigo user, and when I step into a firm that has that they haven't done any previous cybersecurity work, they really don't know what's on their firm. I'm starting with a blank page. It can take me about 2 weeks to get it set up, and a lot of that's because we're just having to do a ton of scanning to make sure, kind of brute force scanning to make sure there's nothing on the network we don't know about. If you're comfortable with the software, if you're technically IT inclined, I think it can easily be a project that you tackle in 3 to 4 weeks. And kind of step through that. There's a little bit of trial and error, getting configuration files, getting configured into a Salesforce configuration file with Nessus, for instance, can sometimes be a little bit of work. But once you get it going, it's really smooth to operate. Once it's set up, I'll say that, it's super easy to maintain. So one question I have is about low budget alternatives to these two tools. So that's a great question. One of the things I should have mentioned, and one of the reasons I'm a fan of Multigo, is they do have a free community edition that you can download and use, which is great because we just turn over the Multigo files to our clients, and so they can interact with them like we do. I think the limitation is you can't automate as many things in the free version. I'm not exactly sure about that, but Multigo does have a free version that you can use and go through some of these same steps. For Nessus, there's definitely some good alternative free versions. If you're familiar with Linux and a command line, and a terminal, there's some great free alternatives out there that do just as good of a job scanning. I'll say the one thing that they lack is they tend to not be updated as often since they're open source, and that sort of thing. They're not updated as frequently as the paid version of Nessus. But we also use that when we go through, we put 3 or 4 different scanners on a system just to make sure we're getting the most complete and not getting any false positives. So there's definitely free vulnerability scanning systems out there. I think a lot of it's just going to depend on your level of expertise. I'm not a Windows guy, so I'm not really familiar with what's available for Windows, but I know there's definitely options for the Linux folks out there. And that's it, guys. That's all I'm seeing in questions. Again, if you guys have anything that you'd like to reach out about, please feel free to do so. I'm certainly happy to to jump on a call or to have an email conversation about your particular firm and share ideas. And again, if you're interested in participating in that town hall, please let us know. We definitely want to get together some smart minds and see what everyone's thinking about how they're going to tackle this within their firm and that sort of thing. So any questions, of course, please feel free to reach out and we'll stand by. Look forward to talking with you. Thanks again very much for attending today. Have a great day, folks.